Hello, boys and girls. Tonight we follow a god with a dream. Not a noble dream, not even a particularly well thought out dream, just a wildly fermented, grape-soaked fever vision of running a respectable winery. And who better to take on such an earthly task than Dionysus? Yes, that Dionysus, the Greek god of wine, madness, and doing things that are absolutely not OSHA compliant. You open your eyes in the hazy glow of dawn, the sky already streaked with the pinks and reds of a morning that smells faintly of grapes and bad decisions. There's music in the distance, possibly a harp, possibly someone strangling a goat. You're not sure. All you know is you've been summoned, not politely, not with dignity, but with a magically enchanted corkscrew that spun itself into your door at 3 a.m. And now here you are, standing in the middle of a rocky field as a barefoot man in a leopard print toga descends from a cloud. Dionysus lands with flair. There are sparkles. There is a breeze that only seems to affect his hair. He raises his arms and announces, "Behold, I bring wine to the mortals, and I will sell it to them for a reasonable price." A moment of silence follows. A goat sneezes. You blink. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And feel free to drop in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is, because nothing makes this chaos cozier than knowing you're out there too. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't know it yet, but you've just been recruited as the assistant vineyard manager. Why? Because you made the mistake of making eye contact with Dionysus. You were hoping for a divine blessing, maybe a free drink. What you got was an unpaid internship. Dionysus paces the uneven ground, arms flailing. "This," he says, pointing, "at the scrubby hilltop is where it shall happen. The nectar of Olympus shall flow here. This will be the most luxurious vineyard in all of Greece." You squint at a tumbleweed that's clearly a rock. The soil here is, at best, sarcastic. You suggest the valley below, lush, fertile, full of great potential. Dionysus laughs. "Too predictable," he says, stomping dramatically on the gravel. "My vines will grow in defiance of nature." You try to remind him that wine is, in fact, agriculture. He responds by crowning himself with a wreath made of dandelions. As you scout the terrain, you find a scroll detailing the actual winemaking process. It's suspiciously sticky and smells like pomegranate. It outlines fermentation, grape varietals, and the importance of temperature control. Dionysus reads the first line and sets it on fire. "No rules," he declares, "only vibes." Fun fact, historically Dionysus, or Bacchus to the Romans, was worshipped through ecstatic rituals involving wine, music, and sometimes full-on chaos. His cults were equal parts celebration and psychological release, which may explain why he's not great at project management. You build the wine press with what you have: old wagon wheels, clay pots, and a suspiciously friendly donkey. It leaks, it groans, it smells vaguely like garlic. Dionysus loves it. "Authentic," he says, sipping from a ladle and making a face that lands somewhere between divine enlightenment and regret. One of the peasants, Petros, approaches, offering some practical advice about crop rotation. Dionysus listens patiently, nodding with what looks like understanding, and then promptly anoints Petros the grape whisperer and sends him to meditate in the hills. Petros never returns. You attempt to plant the vines. It's more of a suggestion than a process. Dionysus insists on singing to each seedling individually, whispering affirmations like, "You are bold, you are juice." He insists this is crucial for growth. You suspect it's mostly for his own amusement, and now the sky darkens slightly, not ominously, but in the way that suggests a wine god is making the weather moody on purpose. The wind smells like figs and rain. You take a deep breath. The first day is done. No grapes, no customers, but several celebratory dances have taken place and at least one barrel has been declared a sacred artifact. Historians still debate whether Dionysus represents agricultural fertility or unhinged chaos. The truth, as always, is probably both. But tonight you're just trying to survive a startup run by a god who thinks spreadsheets are edible and grapes have feelings. And as you crawl into your makeshift bed, made of old cloaks and straw that smells like ambition, you hear him humming to the stars, already planning tomorrow's branding strategy. You sigh. You're in this now. Sleep comes slowly, like molasses uphill. But you wake to the sound of ecstatic laughter and something wet being poured over your forehead. It's wine. At least you hope it's wine. Dionysus stands above you, radiant, holding an amphora upside down like it's a watering can. Blessing. The staff, he declares, for productivity. You are now sticky, hand mildly fermented. Breakfast is a handful of olives and a hunk of bread someone left on a tree stump. A satyr offers you a fig, then eats it himself. You begin to realize that working at a divine vineyard is less about grapes and more about improvisational survival. Dionysus gathers everyone, satyrs, nymphs, 3 confused mortals and 1 goose, for a strategic vision session. He unfurls a scroll titled Vineyard Goals, which is entirely blank except for the phrase, "Be amazing," in glitter ink. He gestures grandly toward the chaos around him and says, "Today we focus on marketing." You raise your hand. "Shouldn't we actually make wine first?" Dionysus gives you a look that suggests you just asked if Zeus wears socks. "Darling," he says, "wine is a concept, a feeling, a lifestyle brand." You suddenly miss your old job. You don't remember what it was, but it definitely involved fewer talking animals. You're assigned to the aesthetics division, which it turns out means painting inspirational slogans on amphorae. Dionysus insists on phrases like, "Unleash the vine within and let the grape guide you." You attempt to paint store in a cool, dry place and are immediately demoted to cup washer. Still, you learn something valuable. In ancient Greece, amphorae were often labeled with names, regions, and vintages, essentially the earliest wine branding. Some even had little jokes or warnings like, "Don't drink too much" or "Property of Themistocles." Hands off. It's oddly comforting to know humanity has always been this way. Meanwhile, Dionysus commissions a theme song. A band of nymphs is forced to rehearse endlessly. The chorus includes the line, "Pour it like it's 500 BC, and an alarming amount of pan flute solos. One satyr breaks his instrument in protest and is promptly promoted. You attempt to find something resembling order. You draft a basic inventory list. Dionysus mistakes it for poetry and performs it aloud at dinner. The other guests applaud. You're handed a laurel crown and told you're head of logistics and artistic pessimism. You're not sure. The first potential buyer arrives. A stern woman named Eudora, who owns several actual vineyards and does not appear impressed by the goats lounging in the fermentation vats. She sips the first sample, makes a noise like someone tasting regret, and asks if this is performance art. Dionysus beams. Exactly. You quietly ask Eudora for feedback. She says it's chaotically herbal and might technically be vinegar. She also suggests storing barrels in shade, using actual grape varietals, and perhaps employing someone who's seen a real vineyard. Dionysus nods solemnly and then hands her a coupon for 1 free ecstatic trance. That night, there's a full moon. Dionysus throws a feast that begins with roasted boar and ends with a nymph trying to teach a goat to dance. You sit by the fire, wine in hand, watching sparks rise into the sky. It's the closest thing to peace you've felt since this divine internship began. And yet in between the absurdity, you notice something strange. The vines are growing. Not well, not in straight lines. But there are green shoots where there were none before. Maybe it's the soil, maybe it's divine influence, maybe it's all the chanting, but something is happening. Historians still debate whether Dionysian rituals had agricultural power or were purely symbolic. Some point to fertility festivals and seasonal cycles. Others argue that Dionysus represents transformation more than results. But here in this lunatic vineyard, you're starting to think it might be both. You lie awake under the stars, wondering if you'll ever return to normal life. But then again, what is normal? You've seen a goat with a monocle. You've heard a nymph deliver a TED talk about tannins. You've watched a god try to file a business license under celestial beverage sorcery. Maybe this is your life now. The wind rustles through the vines. Somewhere nearby, Dionysus is composing a new wine description. You catch snippets, notes of rebellion, undertones of citrus betrayal. You sigh. This isn't a job. It's an epic poem with budget issues. You close your eyes. The air smells like thyme, wine, and eucalyptus foot balm, don't ask. Sleep pulls you gently into the dark, like a cork sliding into a bottle. Morning begins with Dionysus astride a donkey, wearing a laurel crown. New management initiative, he shouts, throwing handfuls of raisins into the air like confetti. We're implementing vertical integration. No one knows what that means, least of all Dionysus. You're instructed to follow the donkey. He is apparently head of distribution now and oversee the harvesting process. It's less harvest and more guess where the grapes are. Vines twist in bizarre, arguably magical directions. Some grow straight into the sky. One seems to whisper in Latin. You decide not to mention it. Grapes are finally collected. With the help of a team of nymphs, one mortal beekeeper, and a chorus line of extremely unmotivated satyrs, they sing a harvesting chant that mostly involves complaining. Still, you manage to fill several baskets. Victory. As you carry the fruit back, you can't help but admire the craftsmanship of the amphorae. Each one is painted with wild, surreal imagery. Dionysus breakdancing, a grape turning into a lion. One amphora shows a perfectly normal vineyard scene, clearly someone's attempt to calm the aesthetic chaos. Fun fact, in the ancient world, wine was often stored in clay jars and sealed with resin, which not only preserved it, but also gave rise to retsina, a wine that tastes, depending on who you ask, like pine needles, history, or regret. You make a mental note to avoid anything. That smells like a candle. Back at the vineyard, Dionysus has declared himself Chief Fermentation Oracle. He's wearing a crown of mold and a robe made from old wine labels. You attempt to suggest a more standard fermentation timeline, something involving yeast, temperature control, and actual barrels. He interrupts. Why do in months what you can do with drama? Then, with great flair, he stomps on a pile of grapes while shouting poetry about desire. The juice sloshes into a vat shaped like a dolphin. You take a step back, possibly several. You begin to develop a system of your own, secretly. A cooler corner of the cellar. Grapes sorted by ripeness. Jars labeled with ink and, heaven help you, real dates. You recruit a quiet mortal named Cleon, who used to work in an olive press and has a surprising talent for organization. Together, you begin the least chaotic batch of wine on the premises. Word spreads. Some of the others sneak over to help. Not everyone wants to ferment with lightning bolts and interpretive dance. You call your batch Batch A because hope in a jar feels a little too on the nose. Then comes the audit. It's not an audit in the traditional sense. Dionysus invites a troupe of traveling mystics who inspect the cellar by licking the walls and shaking maracas at the jars. They declare that your corner feels too linear, but also potentially blessed by a minor deity of timeliness. You take this as a win. Historical debates still swirl around how much control Dionysian cults exerted over their own rituals. Were they wild by design or secretly orchestrated? Some argue that even the chaos had rules. Others say the chaos was the point. Watching Dionysus hand out job titles like Senior Nectar Vibe Manager, you lean toward the latter. Meanwhile, Dionysus has discovered clay tablets and decides they make excellent wine labels. You're now required to carve tasting notes into them, which takes hours. You try. Fruity, slightly unstable, may cause visions, but it's too many symbols. So you shorten it to wine number 3, goodish. Later you attend a board meeting, which is just Dionysus in a toga, seated in a grapevine-wrapped chair, asking everyone to chant their favorite grape in unison. Chardonnay. Agiogitico. Purple. The goose says nothing, but stares with deep judgment. At night you start to dream in vines. You see patterns in the chaos, rhythms beneath the madness. Wine is becoming less of a drink and more of a metaphor, a messy, intoxicating, unpredictable transformation. You wake up with a leaf in your hair and the realization that you're genuinely invested in this fever dream. Then Dionysus announces a tasting event. You are now head of presentation. Your job is to set the scene for divine guests, mortal, nobles, and at least one oracle who only communicates through riddles. The amphorae are polished. Platters of figs, dates, and olive tapenade are arranged, mostly stolen from neighboring farms. But there's a problem. Half the wine has mysteriously vanished. You suspect the satyrs, or the vines, or possibly the amphorae, which may or may not be sentient. You scramble to fill jugs with whatever remains. Your secret batch A, a mystery vintage labeled Oops, and one labeled Do Not Open, probably cursed. Despite everything, the event goes well, or well enough. Dionysus performs a soliloquy about fermentation. Guests get drunk enough to stop asking questions. One nymph weeps openly and declares it the most transcendent Merlot-adjacent experience of her life. As the sun rises, you sit on a hill with Cleon sipping a cup of your own batch. It's not perfect, it might be a little cloudy, but it tastes like grapes, effort, and a small amount of divine spite. And in this strange corner of the world, that feels like you wake up to a crash. A literal crash. Someone has thrown an amphora off a roof. That was experimental, Dionysus mutters, peeking over the edge. Supposed to aerate mid-air. You groan, brushing grape skins off your tunic. The vineyard is more chaotic than usual today, which is saying something. There's a goat dressed like a sommelier and a nymph arguing with a scarecrow about taxes. Today, Dionysus has decided to expand. Not the vineyard, the brand. He's opening a pop-up wine bar in Athens. We'll call it the Grape Escape, he announces proudly. You're head of concept. You never applied for this role. You travel to the city with a donkey, 12 jugs of wine, and a man named Thespis who claims to be part actor, part menu designer. Your setup is unique. A stall draped in ivy, with stools made of tree stumps and a curtain made of old togas. It looks less like a wine bar and more like a Dionysian fever dream that someone tried to monetize. Dionysus insists on an open mic policy. The first performer sings a song about fermented love. The second juggles pomegranates and accidentally hits a senator. You quietly offer him a free drink to avoid charges. Fun fact, in ancient Greece, wine bars, known as symposia, were central to intellectual and social life. They weren't just for drinking, but for debate, poetry, and philosophy. Unfortunately, the Grape Escape leans heavily into the drinking part and lightly on the thinking. Someone is trying to do both and has just shouted, "What if grapes are gods?" before falling asleep in a wine vat. The crowd grows by evening. Nobles, merchants, even a few philosophers show up. One Stoic orders water. Dionysus laughs so hard, he falls off his stool and appoints him Minister of Disappointment. The wine is a hit, though, especially Batch A. People describe it as earthy with notes of confusion. You catch a philosopher scribbling a poem about it on a scroll using wine as ink. You're strangely proud. Dionysus introduces a loyalty. Program drink 5 cups, get possessed by a minor muse. It's not clear if this is metaphorical. One woman claims she now understands geometry. Another won't stop howling at the moon. In the middle of this, a wine critic shows up. He's got a chiton cleaner than your conscience, and a nose so sharp it might qualify as a weapon. He swirls, sniffs, sips, then pauses. Bold, he says. Unexpected. Slightly unhinged. I'll take 3 amphorae. You nearly faint from relief. Later that night, you and Cleon sneak into a quiet alley with one last cup of batch A. You drink slowly, letting the warmth hit your chest like a well-timed memory. The city buzzes around you, but for a moment it feels like you've created something meaningful. But of course, peace is fleeting. You return to the vineyard the next day to find Dionysus planning a vineyard expansion into the underworld. Think. Of the market, he declares. Souls are thirsty? You blink. You mean literal souls? He nods. And maybe a few ghosts. Historians still debate the extent to which Dionysian rites involved communication with the dead. Some say it was symbolic, an exploration of life, death, and rebirth. Others point to darker rituals, where wine served as a bridge between worlds. You personally don't feel like bottling despair, but it's too late. Dionysus is building a tasting room near the river Styx. You're sent to oversee production of the underworld vintage. Grapes grown in total darkness, aged in ashwood barrels, stirred once per moon cycle with a bone spoon. Cleon tries to keep things practical. You try to keep things sane. During one fermentation session, you hear whispering from the vat. You pretend it's the wind. Dionysus claims it's marketing. Whispers of mortality, tastes like legend. You question your life choices more, frequently now. Then there's the branding issue. What do you even call underworld wine? Charon's blend? Cabernet damnation? You finally settle on vintage Thanatos because, honestly, it sounds expensive. At the first tasting, a ghost tries to possess a waiter. Dionysus is delighted. Interactive experience, he says. You're less delighted when the ghost spills wine all over the amphorae. Still, some guests seem impressed. One whispers, "It tastes like endings." Meanwhile, you secretly produce a second batch of your own. No bones, no chance, just grapes, time, and a small prayer to the god of not losing your mind. You label it Batch B. You don't even tell Cleon. As you lay down to rest that night, the moon hangs low and full. A satyr plays a lullaby on a badly tuned lyre. In the distance, you hear Dionysus reciting his autobiography to a pile of pumpkins, and you think, maybe, just maybe, you're beginning to understand him. Or you've finally gone mad, same difference. You wake up tangled in vines, literal ones. Dionysus has introduced a motivational gardening system, which apparently means letting the grapevines grow freely through your bedroom window as a reminder that nature never clocks out. You wrestle your way free, only to find that the god has been up since dawn, sketching plans in the dirt with a stick and humming a song that suspiciously resembles an off-key war chant. Today's idea? A new wine infused with chaos. Not metaphorical. Chaos. Actual, measurable, bottle-able chaos. We call it entropy blanc, he explains, eyes gleaming with the kind of inspiration that usually ends with either glory or fire. No structure, no rules, no consistency. Every bottle is different. Some might even explode. You suggest, gently, that maybe predictability is good when dealing with alcohol. Dionysus waves you off. Uncertainty is the flavor. Besides, the Greeks invented chaos. It's practically heritage. Historical footnote. The concept of chaos in ancient Greek mythology predates the gods themselves. It was the primordial void, the nothingness from which everything, light, darkness, earth, sky, emerged, and now, apparently, wine. Your job is to oversee the first production batch of Entropy Blanc, which feels like trying to parent a tornado. No two amphorae ferment the same way. One smells like olives, another hums softly at night, and a third has developed what Cleon swears is a tiny face. Third blinked at me, he whispers, clutching his clipboard. The wine tasters are confused. One drinks a cup and suddenly starts speaking fluent dolphin. Another bursts into tears and thanks their childhood kite. Dionysus You, meanwhile, are starting to worry about liability. You suggest adding warning labels. Dionysus scoffs. What would we even write? May contain emotional time travel. The debate is interrupted by the arrival of an inspector from the local wine guild. He's here to evaluate whether your products meet basic existential standards. He has a list, he has a clipboard. He has absolutely no idea what he's walking into. He begins with a tour of the storage area. Dionysus proudly gestures to an amphora labeled "Do not open," unless extremely bored. The inspector, of course, opens it. A puff of glitter and a live chicken burst out. You pretend this is normal. Flavor profile, the inspector asks. Delirium with a nutty finish, you reply. He checks something off the list and looks worried. Later, during the official tasting, the inspector samples Entropy Blanc with the wary look of a man who's read too many tragic plays. He sips. He blinks. He sips again. I see clouds, he murmurs. Also, the future? Dionysus nods solemnly. Yes, that's the fermentation time talking. The inspector eventually wanders off mid-sentence, staring into the distance. You mark that down as a pass. Still, the chaos wine is causing more side effects than expected. Some of the nymphs begin painting murals using only grape skins and existential dread. A satyr insists that his reflection is speaking backward prophecies. The scarecrow from the vineyard has disappeared entirely, replaced by a small pile of feathers and a sticky note that says, "Gone to find myself." Historians still debate whether the cult of Dionysus was ever truly about wine, or if wine was merely a vessel, pun intended, for something deeper. The dissolution of boundaries, the loosening of identity, the celebration of disorder as divine. You, staring at a barrel that now glows faintly in the dark, begin to suspect the historians might be right. In an effort to regain some control, you and Cleon secretly begin working on a stability series. Simple wines with normal grapes, aged in standard barrels following standard procedures. You don't tell Dionysus, you even test the wine yourselves. It's okay. A little bland but reliable. Tastes like something that won't whisper to you at night. You bottle your first batch and label it Clarity Red. You hide it behind a fake wall in the storage cellar, protected by a decoy amphora labeled Urgent Medusa Business. Dionysus, of course, finds it within 20 minutes. He sniffs it, he frowns, he tastes. Then he looks at you. It's good, he says. It's fine. But it's safe. He says the word like it burns. You brace yourself for divine wrath. But instead, Dionysus just sighs. Keep making it. Some mortals need anchors, but not me. Then he skips off to feed wine to a tree. That night, you lie awake, listening to the soft rustling of grape leaves outside. The moonlight filters through the vines, casting shadows that look like masks. Somewhere a distant amphora rattles on its own, and you wonder, maybe Dionysus isn't trying to run a vineyard. Maybe he's trying to blur the line between sense and nonsense until we forget there ever was a line. You drift off before you can decide if that's comforting or terrifying. Maybe both. You wake up to screaming. Again. But not the painful kind. No one is on fire yet. This time the screams come from a group of wildly enthusiastic artists who have apparently been touched by last night's barrel of Entropy Blanc. There, painting the walls of the vineyard with vivid frescoes of things that have never existed, like a chariot made of goats, or a banquet attended solely by shadows with hats. Dionysus strolls by, sipping something neon and fizzing. "Our inspiration," he says, gesturing proudly at a mural of a wine goblet floating in space, being worshipped by frogs in togas. "This is what it means to ferment the soul." You try to remind him that you're technically running a business. "Oh, right," he says, squinting at the vineyard ledger, which he's accidentally used to press grape skins for abstract poetry. "How are we doing financially?" You respond with a sound that is neither a word nor a scream, but something in between, like the noise a clay jug makes when it's given up on life. To be fair, there's demand. The noble houses want more entropy. Blank, not because it tastes good, but because it's fashionably dangerous. At a recent Athenian banquet, one senator claimed it helped him commune with his past lives. Unfortunately, one of them was a goat. Historical note: banquets in ancient Greece were less about food and more about philosophy, performance, and posturing. The wine flowed freely, but it was often diluted with water to prevent complete chaos. Dionysus, of course, rejects this tradition entirely. His wine is strong, unfiltered, and according to Cleon's latest note, possibly sentient. The vineyard now hosts daily divine tastings. Attendees wear blindfolds to heighten the mystery. Dionysus insists it's for sensory enhancement, but you suspect he just enjoys watching aristocrats bump into barrels. One man drank an entire goblet and began quoting lost plays of Euripides that haven't been written yet. There's now a suggestion box at the entrance. It's shaped like a ceramic pig and occasionally oinks. The suggestions range from more fire rituals to less teleportation, with a lone, hopeful, "maybe try normal wine again," written in suspiciously familiar handwriting. Dionysus takes the box very seriously. "The people have spoken," he announces one morning, standing atop a barrel like a tipsy philosopher. "We shall host a grateful Dionysia, a festival of flavors, fermentation, and mild peril." You ask what mild peril means. "Oh, you'll see," he replies, grinning the grin of a god. Preparation begins immediately. Nymphs rehearse interpretive dances involving actual grapevines. Satyrs compose songs using only lyres and empty amphorae. One artist sculpts a bust of Dionysus made entirely from wine foam and existential regret. Your job is logistics, which means trying to prevent anyone from turning the guest list into a summoning scroll, or using the wine barrels as flotation devices, or replacing the serving trays with enchanted shields. As the festival day arrives, the vineyard is transformed. Lanterns float between trees. Tables groan under the weight of cheeses you didn't even know existed. Guests arrive in flowing robes, jeweled goblets in hand, ready to drink things that might bite back. Dionysus wears a crown of ivy and something that might once have been a goat. "Welcome," he declares, arms wide, "to the madness that makes sense only if you stop trying." You man the entrance with Cleon, who's wearing a toga 2 sizes too big and muttering about insurance. "Do you think we should have rules?" he asks. You both laugh, and then immediately regret it when someone rides in on a chariot pulled by extremely confused peacocks. The wine flows, people dance, someone recites poetry while balancing on a barrel. A small group claims to have unlocked telepathy after 3 cups of entropy blanc, but they only use it to insult each other silently. Curiosity of the night, a newly unveiled blend called Whispering Rosé. It's pink, lightly carbonated, and occasionally mutters compliments in ancient Etruscan. Historians would later argue whether this marked the beginning of conscious wine or just very talented ventriloquism. Dionysus circulates like a rock star at a toga rave. He blesses each amphora with a wink. At one point he challenges a philosopher to a riddle duel while standing on one leg. "What gets you drunker the more you forget what it is?" he shouts. You suspect the answer is this entire vineyard. Near midnight, a ritual begins. Dionysus calls for silence, and the crowd, a thing older. The air thickens, the grapevines twist toward the moon. The amphorae seem to hum. Then he drinks, and the crowd follows. There's a moment, just one, where everything is still. No laughter, no music, just the sound of breath and wind and wine. And then the frogs start dancing. You don't know where they came from, no one does, but they form a perfect chorus line. As the night spirals into beautiful nonsense, you sit on the vineyard wall with Cleon, sipping the only glass of clarity red in the entire festival. It's quiet, predictable, safe, and strangely, a little boring. You glance at the chaos below, the lights, the laughter, the man trying to debate a tree, and, for the first time, you smile. Maybe Dionysus knows what he's doing. You wake up in a pile of laurel wreaths, with a grapevine wrapped affectionately around your ankle like a clingy toddler. The sun is just rising over the vineyard, casting warm golden light over overturned amphorae, sleeping revelers, and what appears to be a small shrine made entirely out of leftover cheese. You stretch, wince, and take stock. No major fires, minimal goat damage. One very confused philosopher asking a tree for dating advice. By Dionysian standards, a win. Dionysus himself is upside down in a wine barrel, humming what sounds suspiciously like a battle hymn. You poke the barrel. He pops his head out, smiling serenely, his ivy crown slightly askew. "Did we do it?" he asks. You nod. "We did something. The festival's success has spread like fermented wildfire. Travelers, nobles, and misfits from all over the Hellenic world now flock to your vineyard, hoping for enlightenment, or at least a good story. You are, according to one Corinthian poet, the vineyard that dreams in technicolor. There's just one problem. You're out of wine. Specifically out of Entropy Blanc, Whispering Rosé, and Memory Merlot, the three blends most associated with divine mood swings. The demand is sky high, the cellar is bone dry, and Dionysus, unfortunately, has decided he is now above the act of manual fermentation. He has declared himself chief visionary grape whisperer, and has begun hiring wine mediums to spiritually commune with the barrels. Cleon hands you a scroll with the latest accounts. "We have more amphorae than grapes," he says, his tone somewhere between despair and awe. "Someone sold our olive press to a traveling circus. You pinch the bridge of your nose. I thought we were past this phase." "We're never past this phase," Cleon mutters. "This vineyard has phases like the moon, except all of them are waxing chaos. You decide to take control, not by fighting Dionysus, which would be like yelling at a thunderstorm, but by nudging, guiding, gently herding the divine cat back. Toward productive insanity, you propose a new venture, a reserve blend made not for chaos, but for contemplation, a wine that inspires dreams, not hallucinations. You call it Mellow Muse. Dionysus eyes you suspiciously. It doesn't explode, no. Does it whisper forgotten secrets? Only gentle ones. He leans back, swirling a phantom goblet in his hand. I suppose we could try it, but only if we age it in barrels carved from trees struck by lightning. That can be arranged. Historical fact break. In antiquity, barrel aging was not common. Most wine was stored in clay amphorae sealed with resin. But there are scattered references in Roman texts to the idea that the environment, material, and even cosmic timing affected a wine's quality. You suspect Dionysus might have authored some of those scrolls himself, under the pseudonym Plinius the Sloshed. You embark on a harvest unlike any before. The grapes are picked not by hand, but by satyrs on stilts. Dionysus insists it adds height to the flavor profile. Each batch is serenaded by flutes and sung to sleep in their barrels. One batch, refuses to ferment until it hears the ending of a tragic play. The vineyard becomes part winery, part theatre. People start attending just to watch the fermentation process, which now involves lighting incense, playing harp music, and occasionally sacrificing a scented candle to ensure aromatic balance. You keep track, you plan. You whisper quietly to the barrels when no one's looking, just in case. Then one day, Mellow Muse is born. You sip the first drop. It's soft, round, hints of fig, nostalgia, and maybe a little melancholy. Like sitting on a sun-warmed rock, remembering a love letter you never sent. Dionysus tries it and goes very still. Then he sighs. This tastes like peace. You smile. For the first time, he's quiet, reflective. Dare you say sober? The vineyard transforms once again. The chaos dims to a warm glow. Evenings become salons of gentle debate, soft music, and wine that feels like a lullaby. Nobles bring their parents. Scholars take notes. A goat learns to paint. Academic debate moment. Scholars later argue whether Mellow Muse marked a shift in Dionysian philosophy from revelry to reverie. Some claim he was just tired. Others say the god had finally tasted mortality and found it interesting. But peace, like a good vintage, never lasts long. One morning, you find Dionysus on the roof, staring at the sky with an unreadable expression. They want it bottled, he says. Who? The gods? You blink. The wine? He nods. They tasted Mellow Muse at a banquet on Olympus. Now they want a divine reserve, something special, something mortal made but God-worthy. You feel a chill. Is that wise? He grins, but it's different this time. Less madness, more mystery. Wisdom is just madness in slow motion. He tosses you a scroll. It's labeled simply Project Ambrosia. And just like that, your vineyard is no longer of this world. You stare at the scroll marked Project Ambrosia like it might hiss at you. It doesn't, which is a relief. But it does shimmer faintly, an unnatural shimmer, like it was written with moonlight and a hint of regret. Inside, the instructions are both simple and terrifying. One vineyard, one mortal winemaker, one batch, no second chances. Final destination, Mount Olympus. You reread it twice, then turn to Dionysus, who is now wearing a toga made entirely of grape leaves and staring meaningfully at a snail. We're being judged, he says, deadpan, by the snail. No, by the gods. The snail is just my therapist. You decide not to push. So the vineyard goes into overdrive. You draft a new team, not just mortals, but mythical consultants. A sphinx shows up to handle quality control. A dryad offers advice on soil pH. Hermes pops in occasionally to taste test, though somehow half the cellar vanishes every time he does. You oversee it all with the grim determination of someone who knows that even the wind has opinions now. You organize fermentation rituals. You test water blessed by nymphs. You install lightning rods just in case Zeus gets emotional again. Dionysus insists on adding something bold. He brings in a harpist who plays only at dawn, claiming the music will imbue the wine with dreams of sunlight. You don't argue. The last person who did is still stuck in a barrel whispering limericks to himself. Historical fact break. While there's no record of gods commissioning specific vintages, tragic oversight really, wine offerings to the gods, called libations, were central to Greco-Roman ritual life. Even the specific types of wine used for different deities were carefully chosen. Dionysus, of course, got the good stuff, or at least the weird stuff. But ambrosia isn't just another wine. It's something more. You sense it in the way the grapes hum slightly at night, in how the barrels sweat under the moonlight, in the way even Cleon has stopped arguing, and now just murmurs things like, I think the tannins are feeling shy today. You start dreaming of Olympus. Sometimes you're pouring wine into golden chalices for bored immortals. Other times you're just yelling at Hera about grape yields. Either way, your dreams smell like lavender and burnt honey. Then, after 77 days of careful crafting, singing, stirring, and possibly praying to the dishwasher, the wine is done. You gather in the cellar with Dionysus, Cleon, and a surprisingly well-dressed Minotaur. He does logistics. The first amphora of ambrosia is unsealed. The aroma hits you like a lullaby sung through ancient marble halls. You taste it. It's light but infinite, sweet but also deep, like if nostalgia and joy had a baby and that baby knew poetry. Dionysus doesn't speak. He just closes his eyes. Then he claps his hands. A portal opens. Just boom. Right there in the middle of the cellar. Gold-lined, humming softly, smelling faintly of ozone and ambivalence. It's time, he says. You stand frozen. Wait, me? I'm going? Of course, he replies. They want to see the one who dared to balance flavor and fate. You're the mortal who brewed dreams. You don't feel particularly dreamy. You feel like a small, slightly sticky human who still has grape skins under their fingernails. But you nod. You grab the amphora, and you step through. What does Olympus look like? Well, for starters, it's not clouds. That's marketing. It's polished marble, but alive. Every column pulses faintly. The halls echo with music you can almost remember. The air smells like citrus and thunder. Gods appear, drifting in and out of view like actors with no stage directions. Aphrodite waves lazily from a golden couch. Ares glares at you with the intensity of a man who's never lost a wrestling match or a staring contest. Athena gives you an approving nod that somehow contains 10 years of academic critique. You set the amphora down. Your finest, you say, and try not to squeak. Zeus rises. He doesn't speak, just pause. Each god sips. Silence, then laughter. Not just any laughter. Full-bodied, divine, rolling across the heavens like thunder with a sense of humor. Even Hades, visiting for the day, chuckles and mutters, "Not bad for a surface vintage." Dionysus winks at you. You did it, but then he frowns slightly. Now comes the tricky part. You look around. This wasn't the tricky part? They want to offer you a gift. Oh no. Immortality, Zeus rumbles. A place among... Plus, your heart thuds. That sounds incredible. No more worrying about frost on the vines or Cleon mislabeling the amphorae again. But then you remember the vineyard, the sunrise over your grape rows, the weird donkey that keeps showing up. Uninvited, the smell of resin and hope. You shake your head. "Thank you," you say, voice trembling, "but I think I belong down there, among the grapes." The gods go silent. Then slowly Hera raises her glass. "A rare mortal," she says. "Who knows when to stop drinking?" They toast. You step back through the portal, amphora empty, but heart full. Academic debate moment. Historians still argue whether a mortal ever truly set foot on Olympus. Some believe it was all metaphor, a tale told by vineyard workers to inspire ambition. Others point to a single ancient amphora found in a temple in Delphi, with strange inscriptions that mention a wine brewed for stars. Back at the vineyard, Dionysus is quiet. So, you ask, now what? He looks at the sunrise. Now, he says, we try something sparkling. Back at the vineyard, things have changed. The grapes seem plumper, the vines greener, the sky just a bit more dramatic, as if it knows what you've done. You've walked among gods, politely declined immortality, and returned with nothing but stories and possibly mild PTSD from staring into Zeus's unblinking eyes. Still, you're alive, and you're strangely optimistic. Dionysus, on the other hand, is wearing a toga made from disco ball fragments and insists that your next project must effervesce with rebellion. You blink. Are we making protest wine? No, he says, dramatically twirling. Sparkling wine. The kind that bursts on your tongue like a scandal whispered at a royal banquet. You sigh. Of course. But you're intrigued. You've never made sparkling wine before. It's delicate, unpredictable, and requires the kind of precision not normally associated with someone like Dionysus, who once bottled a barrel of rainwater because it had notes of thunder. Still, you get to work. First challenge, carbonation. Your mortal team is skeptical. You want bubbles in the wine? Cleon asks, eyes wide, as if you've asked him to install a windmill in his bedroom. Yes, you say. Tiny ones, playful, chaotic, like if laughter had texture. Second challenge, controlling the fermentation. Normally, wine ferments once, but for sparkling wine, you'll need to trick it into a second fermentation inside the bottle. It's like raising a child and then sending them to college inside a glass prison. You prepare the yeast and sugar, bottling carefully, praying none of them explode. Meanwhile, Dionysus builds a small stage next to the fermentation barrels and books a satyr jazz trio to influence the fizz. You ignore this, but strange things start happening. The bottles hum, the bubbles seem to arrange themselves into constellations. At night you hear them giggling faintly, like champagne flutes sharing gossip. Historical fact moment. Sparkling wine's earliest versions trace back to Roman times, but the real shift came in the 17th century when monks in France began producing it accidentally. Dom Perignon famously tried to prevent bubbles, believing they were a flaw. He also allegedly said, "I'm drinking stars," which is poetic if unverified. Curiosity break. In ancient Greece, adding anything fizzy to wine was unthinkable. They prided themselves on dilution with water. But bubbles? That would have been seen as suspicious or possibly divine, which might explain the strange symbols forming on your bottles. One morning you're inspecting the cellar when a cork pops with such force that it embeds itself in a ceiling beam. "A good omen," Dionysus says, sipping from a goblet and refusing to elaborate. You decide to test. The first batch. You open a bottle gently. Too gently, apparently, because it hisses like a vengeful cat and sprays the ceiling. You taste it anyway. The flavor is light, citrusy, almost flirtatious. It's not just wine. It's wine with attitude. A liquid wink. You present it to Dionysus, who swirls, sniffs, and then gulps. "This," he says, "tastes like music." You're about to bask in the compliment when he adds, "But not enough music. It needs tambourines." "No tambourines," you say firmly. Academic dispute of the day. Some historians claim the Greeks had no version of sparkling wine, but others argue that rudimentary effervescent beverages existed thanks to wild secondary fermentations. They just didn't understand it, and probably blamed mischievous nymphs or bad weather. Inspired by this, you name your first batch Nymphium Sparkle. The label features a poorly drawn satyr riding a cork. It's awful. Dionysus loves it. Then come the tastings. You host a gathering in the vineyard under a full moon. Guests arrive wearing laurel wreaths and curiosity. You pour the sparkling wine into golden flutes, actually brass, but nobody needs to know. They, sip eyes widen, smiles form. Someone giggles uncontrollably for 5 full minutes. A goat faints. You're not sure if it's related. The sparkling wine is a hit, and yet you feel restless. It's not that you're unsatisfied. It's just that for the first time, you see winemaking not as an end, but as a question. What else can wine become? Dionysus seems to sense this. He stands beside you, gazing at the stars. "Wine," he says softly, "is memory made liquid. You've made joy. You've made dreams. What about fear?" You glance at him. "Fear?" He smiles. "The kind of wine that forces people to face themselves. That brings up old secrets. that makes you remember your first heartbreak. That sounds awful. He nods. Exactly. Historical fact moment. Sparkling wine's earliest versions trace back to Roman times, but the real shift came in the 17th century when monks in France began producing it, accidentally. Dom Perignon famously tried to prevent bubbles, believing they were a flaw. He also allegedly said, "I'm drinking stars," which is poetic if unverified. Curiosity break. In ancient Greece, adding anything fizzy to wine was unthinkable. They prided themselves on dilution with water. But bubbles, that would have been seen as suspicious or possibly divine, which might explain the strange symbols forming on your bottles. One morning, you're inspecting the cellar when a cork pops with such force that it embeds itself in a ceiling beam. "A good omen," Dionysus says, sipping from a goblet and refusing to elaborate. You decide to test the first batch. You open a bottle gently. Too gently, apparently, because it hisses like a vengeful cat and sprays the ceiling. You taste it. Anyway, the flavor is light, citrusy, almost flirtatious. It's not just wine, it's wine with attitude. A liquid wink. You present it to Dionysus, who swirls, sniffs, and then gulps. "This," he says, "tastes like music." You're about to bask in the compliment when he adds, "But not enough music, it needs tambourines." "No tambourines," you say firmly. Academic dispute of the day. Some historians claim the Greeks had no version of sparkling wine, but others argue that rudimentary effervescent beverages existed thanks to wild secondary fermentations. They just didn't understand it, and probably blamed mischievous nymphs or bad weather. Inspired by this, you name your first batch Nymphaeum Sparkle. The label features a poorly drawn satyr riding a cork. It's awful. Dionysus loves it. Then come the tastings. You host a gathering in the vineyard under a full moon. Guests arrive wearing laurel wreaths and curiosity. You pour the sparkling wine into golden flutes, actually brass, but nobody needs to know. Sip eyes widen, smiles form. Someone giggles uncontrollably for 5 full minutes. A goat faints. You're not sure if it's related. The sparkling wine is a hit, and yet you feel restless. It's not that you're unsatisfied. It's just that for the first time you see winemaking not as an end, but as a question. What else can wine become? Dionysus seems to sense this. He stands beside you, gazing at the stars. "Wine," he says softly, "is memory made liquid. You've made joy. You've made dreams. What about fear?" You glance at him. "Fear," he smiles. "The kind of wine that forces people to face themselves, that brings up old secrets, that makes you remember your first heartbreak." "That sounds awful," he nods. Immediately, your childhood flashes before your eyes. You remember that time you cried during a school recital because your costume tore. You remember the smell of your grandmother's kitchen. You remember being 5 and realizing you would one day die. You put the cup down slowly. "Well?" Dionysus asks too eagerly. "I think I saw my soul." He claps. "Excellent." The tastings begin again. This time the guests are warned. "Don't drink unless you're ready," you tell. Them, serious as a marble statue. "This isn't wine, this is confrontation." They nod solemnly. The first taster cries for 45 minutes. The second taster breaks up with their fiancée. The third one just yells, "I understand now," and runs into the night. Somehow, this becomes a cult hit. You call it Lith Noir after the river of forgetfulness in Greek mythology. Ironic, really, because no one forgets what they saw after drinking it. Dionysus is thrilled. "We've made therapy obsolete." You're not so sure, but people keep coming back. Academic footnote. Scholars debate whether the ancient Greeks used wine in ritual therapy. Some say yes, pointing to Dionysian rites and the use of wine in oracles. Others argue it was just a party trick gone philosophical. Either way, it worked. Still, you worry. Is this wine too powerful? Should wine ever be powerful? You try mixing Lethe Noir with sparkling Nymphaeum to balance joy and fear, but the resulting flavor causes one of your staff to enter a trance and recite their tax records from memory. You scrap the idea, and then the dreams begin. You see grapes growing on people's faces. You see amphorae filled with sand. You see Dionysus turning into a vineyard and asking you to prune him. You wake up drenched in sweat, whispering, "The tannins are watching." You confront Dionysus. "This wine," you say, "is dangerous." He nods. "All true wine is." You blink. "That doesn't make any sense." He shrugs. "Neither does time or birds. Look, do you want to make the next one or not?" You stare at him. Part of you wants to run. The other part wants to see what happens when wine stops being a drink and becomes a mirror. You agree. And just like that, you're off to invent the world's first memory-aged rosé. You don't know what's worse. The fact that you've agreed to create a rosé infused with memory, or that you're already sketching the label design. It features a weeping statue holding a glass of pink wine. The tagline? Forget what. You know, remember what you felt. Catchy. Horrifying. You get to work, selecting grapes with both lightness and depth. Grenache, a classic for rosé, and Aggiogitico, known for its brooding tones and tendency to taste like it's judging your life choices. Together they promise complexity and the faint taste of suppressed childhood trauma. You crush gently this time, because this wine, unlike Lethe Noir, must whisper rather than scream. The juice runs pale, like a ghost of fruit, and you let it ferment slowly, coolly, as if the tank itself is unsure of what it's becoming. The amphorae are buried deeper now, and Dionysus insists on a bizarre new technique, placing personal objects into the fermenting wine. It needs an anchor, he says, a piece of the past, a souvenir. You resist, you fail, you drop a single sandal into one jar, a relic of a former summer, when you believed in leisure. One of the satyrs adds a broken flute. Someone else drops in a love letter. You don't ask from whom. Historical side note, while no evidence exists that ancient Greeks ever infused wine with personal artifacts, some modern experimental winemakers have played with aging wine near emotional triggers, paintings, music, even memory objects. Most call it nonsense. A few swear the wine feels different. You sip the first draught of memory-aged rosé. It tastes like a goodbye, like a sunburn you didn't notice until later. It finishes with a floral bitterness and the sensation of someone almost saying your name. You shiver. It's working, Dionysus says. You're no longer sure what working means. The tasting for memory-aged rosé, now named Echo de Pétale, goes disturbingly well. Guests speak softly after sipping. One guest writes a 3-page letter to their father, long deceased. Another hums a song they haven't heard since they were 6. Someone laughs, someone cries, someone proposes to the amphora. You bottle it. Meanwhile, the vineyard is different. The vines lean toward you when you pass. The grapes seem to swell, faster when you hum. The wine cellar echoes even when empty. And Dionysus, he's everywhere, in 3 places at once. You stop asking how academic curiosity. Some Hellenistic cults believed Dionysus could divide himself, appearing in multiple forms to guide his followers. Was this metaphorical, hallucinogenic, or just extremely theatrical theology? Historians still debate. You begin having lucid dreams in which you are the vineyard. You feel your roots stretch into the earth. You taste sunlight through your leaves. You wake up thirsty for yourself. You take a break. Well, by break you mean 2 hours staring into a fountain while wondering if wine can develop sentience. You make a lighter wine, a muscat perhaps, something playful. But the vines refuse to cooperate. Every time you harvest a grape meant for something fun, it wilts in protest. The satyrs mutiny. One of them throws a cheese wheel at your head. "We are not clowns," he says. "This is sacred." You nod slowly, wiping goat brie from your forehead. You realize your vineyard now has a conscience. That is fine, probably. You channel your efforts into creating the final wine of this collection, something to tie it all together. A white blend made from forgotten varietals, Malagousia, a theory, and a handful of grapes with names too long to pronounce and too ancient to research. You call it Epilogue. It is meant to taste like resolution. To make it, you harvest only on moonless nights. You press barefoot, you age it in silence, in jars wrapped in linen. You add a single tear from a volunteer who has forgiven someone they shouldn't have. You bottle it in opaque glass. You taste it once, it tastes like closure. Of course, Dionysus throws a feast to celebrate, a feast where no one eats. They only drink and remember. You pour Lethe Noir for the bold, Echo de Pétale for the wistful, and Epilogue for the weary. The crowd grows silent. Not solemn, just present. The wine does what wine was always meant to do. It carries them somewhere, not forward, not back, just deeper. Historical anchor. Ancient symposiums weren't just drinking parties, they were cultural events, with music, poetry, and deep conversation. Wine was seen as a means of transcendence, connection, and even philosophical clarity. Not just alcohol, a conduit. You realize you've recreated that, except, slightly more haunted. You raise your glass and toast, not to Dionysus, but to grace, to the strange, fragile truth that fermentation doesn't just transform grapes. You wake up in the vineyard, wrapped in a toga you don't remember putting on, next to an amphora you definitely didn't name Susan the night before. Susan, by the way, is leaking slightly. She smells like peaches and prophecy. It's dawn. The vines hum gently, as if they've just finished an all-night jam session without you. You sit up and look around. Everything's too green, too alive, too knowing. You think maybe you should take a break from drinking your own product. But Dionysus has other plans. "Now we teach them," he says, appearing beside you mid-stretch, like some sort of vine-scented apparition. "You've made wines of forgetting, remembering, and ending. But what about becoming?" You stare at him. "Aren't people already doing enough becoming?" He smiles. "Not the right kind." And with that, you're pulled into your final act, wine as metamorphosis. This time, the fermentation isn't in jars or barrels or caves. It's in the air. You open windows. You dig tunnels. You hang grapes from the ceilings of bathhouses and let the fermentation happen mid-flight. You create a wine that's never fully contained. Chrysalis blend. A swirling cloud of floral must and effervescence that must be caught in the air. Like a butterfly in a net, you bottle it only in mist. You serve it in vapor. Guests drink it through silk handkerchiefs. No one knows if they're drunk or just deeply moisturized. Curious detail, there are historical mentions of aerated wines in some obscure Roman texts. Though most scholars believe these to be early mistakes in carbonation, still a few fragments suggest wine was once dispersed like perfume during ceremonies. Maybe someone was onto something, or very high. You test it yourself. First sip, you feel taller, wiser, slightly amphibian. Second sip, you forget your middle name but recall every crush you had between ages 9 and 14. Third sip, you can taste colors. Historians might debate this one too, whether ancient cult rituals aimed at inducing metamorphic states were metaphorical, medicinal, or mystic. One fragment says the Maenads could become deer. Another implies Dionysus once turned into a dolphin mid-toast. Either way, someone brought a costume. You begin to notice the guests changing, not in body but in posture, tone, and truth. One laughs in a voice they haven't used in decades. One finally tells their friend they love them. One starts painting vines in the dirt with their fingers and forgets to stop. The wine is working, but then it turns on you. You sip chrysalis too deeply, trying to edit its effects to perfect the blend, and something shifts. You blink, and you're not quite you anymore. You are vines. You are stone. You are the silence before laughter. You speak, and your voice comes out in grape clusters. The satyrs are worried. Dionysus is delighted. You've become the wine, he says, clapping. I always wondered what that would be like. You try to glare at him, but your eyes are raisins. Eventually, after what might be an hour or a century, you emerge, changed. Not dramatically. You still have your arms and legs, but something beneath your sternum now bubbles slightly. Your thoughts sometimes fizz, and you can identify varietals by smell alone, even the forgotten ones. You spend days just breathing in barrels. At one point, you try to explain what happened to a scholar who comes to visit. He asks for notes, and you give him a bottle of chrysalis. He drinks, he sobs. He quits academia and becomes a shepherd. It's fine. He seems happier. You accept that you're part of the wine now, not metaphorically, literally. Somewhere in every bottle, there's a whisper of your soul, a flicker of your confusion, a trace of that one very poor decision involving an oak barrel and a philosophy student. You begin to sleep in the vineyard, not because you're tired, but because you're rooted. Each morning you rise before the sun and sing to the vines. They respond by growing sweeter grapes. You think they like your voice, even though it still occasionally echoes with ancient laughter. You are no longer just a winemaker. You are a custodian of transformation. You get a letter. It's from someone who drank Lethe Noir. They don't remember their past, but they've started sculpting strange, beautiful towers out of driftwood. They thank you. Another writes after sipping Echo de Pétale. They found an old photo of their grandmother, smiled and cried. They say the wine helped, and from a faraway island, a woman who inhaled chrysalis sends a sketch of herself with butterfly wings, grinning like someone who finally remembered her own punchline. You pin it to the cellar wall. That night, Dionysus joins you for a final cup under the stars. He doesn't say much, neither do you. The wine speaks. You wake up to rain, but not the kind of rain that ruins plans or washes away mortar from half-built walls. This rain is soft, curious, like it's just now learning how to fall. You lie still under a makeshift canopy of grape leaves and amphora lids, blinking up at the grey sky. Somewhere off in the distance, a donkey brays in a key only minor gods can hear. Your vineyard, your improbable myth-soaked vineyard, is humming like a well-fed lyre. The vines are lush. The wines are strange. Too strange for some, but for others they're exactly what's needed. Today Dionysus isn't here, which is strange because he's always here, or rather he's always about to be here. He exists like an aftertaste, lingering just behind your thoughts, but not today. Today it's just you and the bottles, and a message. It's scrawled on a broken wine label and pinned under a rock near the grape press. You don't recognize the handwriting, which is odd because it's your own. It's time to let them taste without you. You stare at the note for a long moment. Then you begin bottling. Not one or two, all of them. Lethe Noir, Echo de Pétale, Chrysalis Blend. A few others that never got names, only shapes, like the one you aged in a statue, or the one that fermented under moonlight in a silver bowl blessed by a sarcastic priest, and, yes, even Susan, now patched up and spiritually stabilized. You fill crates, you seal them with wax made from the ashes of old tasting menus. You mark them with symbols that look like constellations or long-forgotten traffic signs, and then you send them away, by donkey, cart, ship, and rumor. Curious detail. Ancient trade routes didn't just move goods. They spread cults, superstitions, and flavors. Some amphorae found in Gaul still contain traces of Egyptian resins. Historians still argue whether these were preservatives, offerings, or just an unfortunate shipping error. You imagine your wines joining that parade of improbable cargo. Some will make it intact, some won't. One bottle might be dropped in a river and drunk by a confused stork. Another may end up on a poet's doorstep, misdelivered by a goat. It doesn't matter. You've made something that can live beyond you now. Something that speaks even when you don't. Still, you can't help but wonder, what happens when the gods drink, not metaphorically, literally? Because this is when Dionysus returns, not as before, in song, in chaos, in echoes of laughter, but as something older. He arrives at dusk, barefoot, eyes full of time. This, he says, holding up a bottle of Lethe Noir, is dangerous. You nod. And this, he lifts a bottle of Chrysalis, is foolish. You agree. And this, he grins, uncorking a bottle with a flourish that makes a nearby fig tree blush, is delicious, sir. He takes a sip. The sky flickers, the vines rustle. A nearby statue of Apollo quietly weeps. You wait. He drinks again, slower. Then he sighs. You've done it, he says. You made wine that teaches the gods. You try to laugh, but it comes out more like a cough soaked in disbelief. You think I'm kidding, he says, swirling the wine. But this is memory. This is forgetting. This is becoming. He takes one last sip and places the bottle gently beside him. Then, without ceremony, he leans back and begins to fade, not in a tragic way, more like mist rising, or a party, ending exactly when it should. You won't see me again, he says, but you'll see echoes. You ask what he means. He just taps your chest. You'll feel it. And then he's gone. You sit for a long time after that, unsure if he was real or just another tasting note in the chaos of your fermented life. Eventually you sleep, and when you wake again, everything is normal. As normal as a vineyard touched by myth can be. The grapes grow, the sun rises. The barrels creak and whisper in the night, and people come. They don't arrive in droves. This is no pilgrimage site, but the ones who find their way here. They come softly, with quiet hearts and curious eyes. A philosopher seeking silence. A widow, chasing one last scent. A child who swears she dreamed of you and your talking vines. You greet them all the same, with a glass. Sometimes you explain, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you pour them something that hasn't been named, only felt. And when they leave, they always take something invisible with them. That's how you know it's working. Not because of applause or fame or coin, but because they walk away different, softer, lighter, more themselves than before. The wine lives on, and so do you. You find yourself in the shadow of a withering pergola, where the grapevines, once symbols of vitality, now hang like forgotten laundry on a rainy day. The air is thick with the scent of sour fruit and political treachery. Dionysus stands barefoot, in the mud, his purple robe stained with juice and ego, lecturing a row of absolutely terrified interns on the proper ritual for fermentation. There are drums in the distance again, or maybe it's just the sound of barrels exploding from pressure. It's hard to tell these days. Dionysus has a plan. Well, plan might be a strong word. It's more like an oracle-inspired fever dream that involves flooding the wine cellar and letting the spirits decide their own fate. The accountants are less enthusiastic. You pass by one muttering something about quarterly projections and the wrath of Hera before promptly fainting into a vat of unfinished rosé. Here's the thing. While most gods prefer temples and worship, Dionysus has fully committed to the idea that a vineyard can be a holy site, so he treats it like one. Every barrel gets an anointing, every wine press a hymn. Even the vineyard rats are considered initiate messengers of the sacred intoxication, which is a very polite way of saying, We're infested. You spot a Roman ambassador on the edge of the vineyard. He's holding a scroll in one hand and a goblet of something suspiciously cloudy in the other. He sips, gags, and says, "Delightful," because diplomacy sometimes requires lying through your teeth. Dionysus waves at him with both arms, slips on a grape and lands directly on an altar made of cheese. You wince, but the ambassador claps. Performance art? Political theatre? You're no longer sure. A well-known historical fact. Romans loved their wine, but they preferred it diluted. Dionysus, of course, believes this is heresy. Water, in his opinion, is for baths, plants, and very boring people. His philosophy? If your wine doesn't bite back, you're doing it wrong. And so the negotiations begin. The vineyard is now at the center of a delicate treaty between Dionysus and Rome. On one side, drunken liberation. On the other, imperial pragmatism. Somewhere in between you, pretending to take notes on a wax tablet that's actually just your lunch tray flipped upside down. One curiosity emerges during the talks. The Roman ambassadors bring with them a new tool, glass cups. Shiny, fragile, suspiciously transparent. Dionysus pokes at one with a twig and immediately declares it cursed. "You can see the wine before you taste it," he says, horrified. "Where's the mystery? Where's the trust?" He demands that all negotiations be conducted using amphorae instead, which leads to an awkward moment where the ambassador accidentally pours Merlot down his toga. Historians still debate whether this treaty even happened. Some scrolls suggest it was just a party that got wildly out of hand. Others claim it was an official union between Dionysian rites and Roman wine culture. One scroll simply reads, "Too much shouting, everyone sticky, 210. By sunset, the vineyard has become an odd blend of cultures. Roman efficiency meets divine chaos. A Roman engineer designs a drainage system for the wine runoff. Dionysus immediately uses it as a slip and slide. There's a makeshift amphitheater built out of barrels. Someone's trying to stage a play called The Grape Gatsby. It's not going well. You're ushered into a tent by a centurion who smells like pomegranate and despair. Inside, Dionysus is trying to convince a group of Roman officials that wine should replace currency. "Think about it," he says, eyes glittering. "No more taxes, just tipsy exchanges of fermented delight." One senator vomits quietly into a scroll. Another nods solemnly, perhaps out of fear. It's here in this absurd swirl of grape juice, paperwork, and divine ego that you realize something profound. Dionysus may not be a good winemaker, or administrator, or economist, but he is, undeniably, a performer. And this vineyard, it's his stage. The treaties, the chaos, the ritualized tastings, it's all just a long, sticky poem about freedom, chaos, and the sheer unpredictability of desire. The talks conclude with a toast. Dionysus lifts a goblet the size of your head and roars something in ancient Greek that may or may not be a pun about fermentation. The Romans cheer or cry. It's hard to tell. Either way, the treaty is sealed, not with signatures, but with synchronized grape stomping. You're handed a laurel crown dipped in Cabernet. You're not sure if it's a prize or just wet. And just when things seem to have settled, a new problem arises. The barrels have legs. Or rather, someone, probably, one of the actors from The Grape Gatsby, has turned the wine barrels into mobile drinking carts. They're wheeled into the field, spilling trails of liquid memory across the soil. You sit back on a fallen statue, watch the vineyard spin into another Dionysian twilight, and wonder, did any of this make sense? Probably not. Will it matter by morning? Definitely not. But that's the vineyard now. A living contradiction. Part myth, part business venture, part ongoing party that might accidentally change the course of Western agriculture. and you're still not getting paid. The vineyard doesn't sleep anymore. Not really, not now. Not with everything that's happened. By the time the last Roman official is wheeled out on a barrel chair like some drunken Caesar of the vines, Dionysus has declared victory. Victory over what exactly remains unclear. Logic? Decorum? The wine-tasting committee from Delphi? All plausible. You wake up in a hammock strung between two olive trees, your tunic soaked in what might be grape juice or possibly just your own tears. Dionysus is already up, dancing in slow circles with a wreath on his head and a goblet in each hand, like a deity who missed every meeting but still got promoted. Today, he says, we harvest the moon. You blink. That's not a thing. He winks. It is now. It turns out harvesting the moon is code for his latest project, lunar fermentation. Dionysus is convinced that if you press grapes during a full moon, the wine will inherit its celestial wisdom. Historians would later call this idea charmingly deranged, though some modern winemakers have taken a suspicious interest. As you follow him through the vineyard, you notice the workers now wear masks, half theatrical, half protective. Not from the wine, but from the spontaneous rituals that tend to burst out like fireworks when Dionysus gets poetic. Last week, someone accidentally summoned a goat. It now serves as head of security. The vines themselves seem to have grown wilder, more tangled, as if reflecting the divine energy pulsing through the soil. You run a hand along one. It hums. That can't be normal. Dionysus climbs atop a cart of rotting grapes and shouts, "We are no longer just a vineyard. We are a movement, a revolution, a very purple insurrection." A known historical fact. Dionysus's cults often blurred the line between ritual and rebellion. Their festivals, the Bacchanalia, were eventually banned in Rome for being too chaotic. Even for Romans. If you've ever been kicked out of a toga party for summoning a spirit with a tambourine, you understand the vibe. The vineyard is now flooded with newcomers, artists, priests, very lost travelers. They call themselves fermentalists, and they believe that true enlightenment comes from letting wine ferment, not just in barrels, but in your soul. One carries a scroll that simply reads, "Yeast is love. You're given a new role. Keeper of the cork." No one explains what this means, but you're handed a staff shaped like a corkscrew and told to guard the vintage. You ask, "Which vintage?" They reply, "Yes." One curiosity you discover that day. Ancient Greeks sometimes buried amphorae of wine underground to age them better. Dionysus, naturally, decides to bury a full-size chariot instead, with wine in it. "It'll be a time capsule," he says, "for future archaeologists, or really lucky moles." You pass a group of fermentalists attempting to compose a hymn using only the popping sounds of wine fermentation. It's oddly catchy. One goat harmonizes. Somewhere near the edge of the vineyard, you find a quiet moment. A rare breeze lifts your hair. The moon has indeed risen, large, low and yellow, like the yolk of a cosmic egg. Dionysus leans beside you, arms crossed, eyes unusually calm. "It's never been about wine, you know," he says. You nod. "Yeah, it's about chaos," he chuckles. "Not quite, it's about surrender, letting go, letting things ferment. People try to control too much. Fermentation only happens when you stop meddling." You're silent for a long moment. Then, "That's surprisingly wise for someone who once tried to ferment honey with thunder," he grins. "Did it work?" "No." "Well, still worth a try." Historians still debate whether Dionysus truly cared about wine as a product, or simply used it as a vessel for something deeper, freedom perhaps, or transformation, or just an excuse to wear leopard print. But on nights like this, you start to believe he meant every mad word. The final. Celebration begins just before dawn. Lanterns float above the vineyard like glowing fruit. Every barrel is uncorked, every amphora is tapped. You're pulled into a ring of dancers, your feet sticking to the grape-slick ground, your mind drifting somewhere sweet and strange. And just like that, the vineyard begins to dissolve. Not literally, but figuratively. The rituals fade. The guests wander off in search of new myths. The fermentalists retreat to the hills. Even the goat files for retirement. You and Dionysus sit beneath a fig tree, sipping the last of the moon wine from acorn cups. So, you ask, what now? He shrugs. I heard someone's building a brewery in Mesopotamia. Might go stir things up. You shake your head. Gods don't retire, do they? Retire. Never. But occasionally. He stretches, yawns, and leans back with a lazy grin. We nap. And now the vineyard grows quiet again, the lanterns have dimmed. The laughter has softened. The barrels rest peacefully beneath their woven blankets, and the vines sway in the breeze like sleepy dancers bowing to the night. You sit alone now, under a fig tree, where the air smells faintly of wildflowers and old wine. Above you the moon continues its silent watch. It's the kind of moon that doesn't ask questions, just listens. Like an old friend who knows when to speak and when to simply be. The last echoes of music fade into the distance, carried off by the soft hum of insects and wind. Even the goat, once a fearless sentinel of the wine rites, is curled up in the hay, snoring gently with a grape still lodged in his beard. There's no need to rush, no need to think about the chaos or the absurdity, or whether Dionysus will ever file a single invoice. None of that matters now. Here in this quiet moment you are safe, you are still, and the world, no matter how strange, is at peace. So let your eyes grow heavy, let your thoughts soften and drift gently into sleep. Because tonight you've traveled far, not just through vineyards and madness, but through story and laughter, and the strange comfort of not having to understand it all. The wine may ferment, the world may turn, but for now you rest, breathe deep, and dream sweet.